so I
Okay.
should not lose my audio by any means. So once we start, because since yesterday night it is raining like anything,
Uh,
so and the whole day without stopping. So that is the whole thing. So if you permit now, let me start formally. Uh,
sure.
Good evening from India, and if it's good morning for you in the United States, Professor Robert Bob Staines, if I am not wrong, correctly your name. And so this is part of the mediation series, a dialogue on mediation series that Gandhi, Smriti, and Darshan Samiti is organizing for the last several, months. And the overarching goal is to promote mediation in the country. Only yes, a few days back, our Chief Justice of India, the Supreme Court, he said that mediation should be made compulsory before litigation. So the whole essence on mediation and dialogue, that is very, very important and the key. Here I want to read out the work that Professor Bob Staines have done for all our participants in different programs who will be seeing this video. Professor Robert Bob Staines is a seasoned facilitator of challenging conversations about identity, religion, and values, and has trained over 30,000 professionals in communication and dialogue, facilitating skills in the United States and abroad. He is the principal of Bob Staines and Associates Conflict Transformation and a senior associate of Essential Partners, the Public Conversation Project. He advises leaders on preventing and engaging conflict and has been working with organizations in Taiwan, Germany, Finland, and France, the Philippines, and Switzerland, in addition to the United States. This fall, he will be launching a new coaching and monitoring program, the Transforming Conversations Collaborative, to help mediators expand their practice into dialogue. Extremely critical, sir, because mediation and the whole process of dialogue, and as we know, we have been working a lot on the issue of dialogues, and it seems there seems to be a dialogue deficit in the world in the context of so much of conflict that we find in today's scenario. And Professor Bob has consulted to the Harvard Negotiation Project at the Harvard Law School for 15 years and has taught in the Dispute Resolution Program at the Pepperdine and the Michelle Hamline University Schools of Law, as well as the Harvard Divinity School. He also serves as a visiting researcher and adjunct faculty of the Boston University School of the Theology Program of Conflict Transformation. He has also been an original mediator trainers of the United States Postal Service Innovative Redress Mediation Program based on transformative mediation and served as a redress mediator for many years. He has helped the Public Conversation Project, a pioneer of the modern dialogue movement, from a small local group to an internationally renowned team of practitioners, trainers, and consultants. We are honored to have you with us today in this dialogue, and I'm sure all our listeners, all our participants who are going to be seeing this video will be helped immensely from this whole dialogue. Also, for your information, we are making it YouTube live. And also for your information, since we want to make it a very focused dialogue, that's why we have purposefully not invited many people in this particular platform, so that we are very focused in how we are having this dialogue. So it's again an honor. And for your information, Gandhi Smriti is the national memorial of Mahatma Gandhi, the place where the Apostle of Peace fell to assassins' bullets. So here we are starting today on this whole idea of conflict transformation and dialogues. And in this, the first important question that we have in this important dialogue is how conflict transformation is not merely about applying a specific set of techniques to deal with conflict. It is more in the nature of peace building. How powerful is dialogue as a transformational tool in your eyes? It's so important. We were working on the whole issue of conflict transformation and and its important role for promotion of culture of peace. So how do you see the centrality of dialogue in the transformational tool? So
Well, thank you so much for that introduction. Whenever I hear an introduction about myself, I feel like I should go step into another room while people introduce me because I get embarrassed. It just means that I've been on the earth for a long time, that I've been able to do a lot of stuff. Um, and it's such an honor to be with you and to be with the work that you are doing and have done over so many years. I'm very touched to be able to be with you today and to be able to talk about conflict transformation. So let's talk about that for a minute. My background is first as a marriage and family therapist, and then also as a mediator. Um, and when I was doing mediation work more actively, I still do some, but not a whole lot. The focus was on conflict resolution. And I knew from my work as a marriage and family therapist that you can resolve a conflict in a family, but that family won't necessarily be transformed and be able to live together more effectively, even if the conflict is resolved. And that's the case with many of the conflicts that we deal with in our world today. Some of them actually can't be resolved because there are differences of identity or values or religion, and people will never agree on the substance. But they can be transformed, and people can transform the ways that they engage each other, the ways that they treat each other, the ways that they think about each other. So when we're talking about conflict transformation, we're talking not just about transforming that conflict, but helping the people that are involved in that conflict transform the ways that they think about one another, the way that they think about themselves, and the ways that they think about how they engage around the things that they disagree about. And we have this incredible opportunity through dialogue and through other means to bring people into a process where they truly can see each other differently. They can see each other with new eyes and have new hearts toward each other. And that can lay a foundation for changing the ways that they treat each other and transforming their relationships. And I think if we were able to have more emphasis on the power of relationship and the power of transforming relationships in the context of conflict, we would get a lot farther in our world. So I think it's really important. I'm just going to look at a couple of notes that I took based on your questions, which I really appreciated having in advance. The other thing that's important, I think, in conflict transformation is that people often come to a conflict with a fixed story. They have a fixed story about them, and they have a fixed story about the conflict that they're involved in. And that story is just by its very nature often really inaccurate, or at least thin. People are very multiple, very complex creatures. We all carry multiple stories about who we are and how we are in the world. And someone on the other side of an issue may only see one thin story of us. And dialogue gives people the opportunity to expand the stories that they hold of each other. So they're no longer seeing each other as just a thin stereotype, as an enemy. And they're full human people with complex identities, values, worldviews, etc. And in that way, when people start to change the story, they start to change the ways they see and interact with each other and transform those relationships and the conflicts that they're embedded in. So I think I'll stop there and see if you have something more that you'd like to ask or a follow-on thought.
You have stressed on how the relationships get transformed when we have a dialogue. Also, when in the context of some kind of in different form of disputes or conflicts, when the opposing parties start having a dialogue process, what happens is that there will be some different forms of emotions, like party A and party B, they're in conflict, and there will be a lot of issues related to emotions when they're coming into that process of dialogue. So what is the role of emotions, and what are the challenges to for different forms of emotions that might creep in when during the dialogue process?
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think that I've seen and I've experienced actually two fundamental errors that people that are preparing either mediators or facilitators or even therapists fall into. And that's to either discourage the expression of emotion, let's just keep it out of the room and treat it as something bad, or let's just open the floodgates and encourage the unbridled expression of emotion. Either of those is going to create trouble. Keeping emotions out of the room, you're not really keeping emotions out of the room because we have them, we feel them. When we care about the issues that are at hand, we have passion, we have anger. If we've been hurt, we have feelings and emotions. So we want to recognize that, and we want to create a space where people can bring those emotions into the room in a way that helps people connect with them and helps people understand them at a deeper level. So through the power of dialogue with a particular model that I use most frequently, which is reflective structured dialogue, created by the Public Conversations Project and now housed at Essential Partners in Cambridge, Mass. We work very hard with people in advance, and then we create a very structured process so that people can bring their emotion, express their emotion, but do it in a way that the other can actually hear and not just defend against. And do it in a way that when the person's speaking, they can speak it in a way that doesn't leave them feeling like they're ashamed after they've spoken or like they've said too much, or I don't know, any of the other bad things that people can feel when they put emotion out into the world in a way that doesn't work well for them. So emotions are what really connect people at a deep level. When someone expresses an emotion, we can resonate with it. Doesn't really matter what your experience is as an individual. Let's say you talk about a death that you've experienced, and it's your grandmother. Well, I may not have had a grandmother who died, but I've experienced death and I have had a grandmother. So I'm going to resonate with you at some level when you tell me that with the feeling that's attached to it. I'm going to feel then a certain connection to you because of that emotion. So we want that in the room, but we want it in a way that's not going to burn the house down, so to speak. So the structure and process of dialogue enables people to do that and enables people to, the trauma therapists talk about self-regulation, the importance of being able to uh, bring emotion out in a way that is going to work for you and work for the group. So the structure and process of dialogue, I think, helps
in this,
support people in that. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, in this context also, I wanted to ask you, you see, when we are talking of emotions and in the dialogue process, what we generally find in the process of mediation or dialogue is that many of us probably do not have that, expansive emotional vocabulary. We are not in a position to express our feelings in a proper way.
Yeah.
Also, it leads to the situation where we are not able to connect with the needs of others. No, why critically? No, basically, most of the problems happen because we are not able to connect with the needs of others. So, how do you think, as someone who has been training professionals from across the world, how do we expand the emotional vocabulary of people at large, and especially those who are into the dialogue process or in the mediation process? How do we do that, and how do we possibly, as people who are into the process of dialogues, how there could be biases that could creep in also. So how we have a balance, in the one hand we are talking of expansion of emotional vocabulary, on the other hand when we are talking of dialogue process for resolution of a particular conflict, how do we also see that the biases don't creep in? Like, what in your own experience, if you could share some interesting insights and examples from your own work across the world.
Well, let me break this into three components. So one component is how to help people in dialogue express their emotion in a wider variety of ways, which I think is what you're talking about. Um, the other component is what happens to the facilitator in the presence of someone else's strong emotion. And a subset of that is what kind of bias do I have as a facilitator coming from where I come from, both in terms of my gender, my race, etc. And what do I do with that? So, especially with that last one, you may have to call me back to it because I might forget in the talking that I want to get to that. But I'll start with the expanding the vocabulary of emotion. Um, so in this particular approach to dialogue, um, we often think that dialogue starts when people come into the room together. But I'll give you an example of a different way to think about this. Um, I believe very, very strongly in the power of preparation. That that people really need to come prepared to participate in a dialogue. So do a lot of advanced work, and it depends on the situation. An example: I was working with a group of people who had been in state mental hospitals, who had been patients, who are now not patients anymore, and people who were administrators of hospitals. And they were on a task force to reduce the use of uh, restraints, being tied to a bed, and seclusion, being put in a room by yourself, which have been sadly common tactics used in state hospitals in other places. But they were trying to reduce that, and they broke apart after a year of work, and they could not work together. They just could not be in the same room together because of the differential experiences and how those experiences were expressed. So I was asked to, with my colleague Dave Joseph, um, we were asked to see if we could work with this group to come together again. It took 7 months of work in advance with the group separately before they could come together and have a constructive dialogue. And during those 7 months, a lot of what we were helping them do was to expand the ways that they could talk about their experience and their feelings so that others could hear them. And we did it through training, through role plays, etc. But the important thing to remember is when you're starting out, to try to get a sense of what people need to do before they come into the room. It may be that they need to get some training. It may be that they need to do some group work. It may be that they need to do some role playing, but all in the service of helping them to really speak their truth in a way that can be received by the other. So that's an approach to helping people expand the vocabulary of emotion, expand the ways that they express emotion. And then you have the problem of what happens when strong emotion comes up, me as a facilitator. Um, so what happens when I'm facilitating a dialogue and a woman in the dialogue talks about a horrible experience that she's had with a man and how that has framed her ideas about men? Well, that's going to bring up emotion for me, regardless whether I like it or not. No matter how long I've been a professional, it's going to bring up emotions for me. So what do I do with those? How do I manage in that situation? Well, again, um, if somebody has been working with me as a facilitator, they would have been helping me to prepare myself in advance for these kinds of things, to have a deeper understanding of what my tender points are, where I might be likely to get triggered by what somebody else says, and how I can respond with a full heart in the midst of that while acknowledging that this is a tender place for me. I have a friend and colleague, Duncan Holloman, who has a wonderful phrase that he uses, and yet, that we can acknowledge that, and yet we can still be present. And in some ways, the acknowledgement of that is to allow ourselves to also be present to the person at hand. So I want to constantly be working on myself. And I have an exercise that I teach facilitators to assess how all aspects of their background influence how they're going to be with a particular group of people. So how is my race, how is my age, how is my gender going to impact how I'm going to hear, what I'm not going to hear, what I'm not likely to see, or how I'm going to respond to people who are different from me that I'm trying to facilitate. So doing that advanced and internal work is also important. And I guess that relates to has brought us to the bias piece. Um, I think, and this comes from my therapy training as a marriage and family therapist. In marriage and family therapy, we're taught the principle of multi-partiality, that we are naturally going to gravitate to one party or another in a family. But our job is to be fully engaged with each person equally, to show them the same amount of heart that we bring to every other person in that family. And I think that's the duty of the facilitator of dialogue as well. It's not neutrality. Um, and in some ways, I think that that is a myth. Um, we have feelings, we have perspectives, we have biases, but what do we do with those? Can we hold them in one hand uh, and with the other hand be as fully present to each person in that dialogue as we are to the next? If we can't do that, then I think we might be thinking about a different profession. That said, it's also a pathway, and it's a discipline. It's like a spiritual discipline. We're always on the path, and we probably never reach the destination, but we hopefully are moving closer and closer to being fully present to everybody in the room. Okay, I'm going off on tangents now, so you might want to rein me in.
That's right. That's right, sir. That's right. In fact, also, you see, we have our friends, as I mentioned to you, Manshi Sharma. We have Dr. Sthiti Dasgupta, who is teaching in a law university here, and Roji, who is into peace and conflict transformation. So, also, my request is to each one of you to also think of any questions you would like to ask from sir. You are most welcome to. You could construct your own questions and get your clarity and get your questions for sir. Continuing, sir, in the context of dialogue, in fact, I've been, conducting these workshops on nonviolent communication for universities from different countries across the world. And there, one of the major issue has been on the issue of dialogue. And today only I was talking to one Professor Auchi from Japan, and there we were talking on the, it looks like in, especially in many of these conflicts that are going on in different countries across the world, there seems to be dialogue deficit. Basically, we don't want to enter into a dialogue, and even if we are trying to so-called enter into a situation of dialogue, we are, quite strongly sort of adamant in terms of our positions. We are not interested to look at the point of view of the other person. How do you think that we can promote a culture of dialogue? That's what we were talking with Dr. Auchi. Culture of dialogue. How do you think we can promote a culture of dialogue across different communities across the world to make it an important pillar to resolve disputes through non-violent means? And how do we transform communities through this power of dialogue? So it's a serious issue, the dialogue deficit. So, so how, in your own way, can you think we can encourage dialogues in different communities?
Well, I think first, I would say that I never try to convince somebody to participate in dialogue. Um, and I try to lead with the idea that dialogue is only one way to engage conflict. There are a lot of other ways, and it depends on the nature of the conflict and the nature of the purpose of the engagement as to whether dialogue is going to be the right tool for someone that's embroiled in a conflict. Sometimes it's mediation, sometimes it's advocacy. So you have to, I think, be clear about where dialogue is useful and where it's not. There are places where I think dialogue is exactly the wrong choice for engaging in particular dispute or issue. So I want to be very clear about that as an opening step so that people don't feel like I'm there as a salesman trying to sell them on a product. Um, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell stories. I want to tell stories that are, or I'm actually going to get people that are um, from a similar context or an identity group to tell the stories of how dialogue has helped them. If somebody's interested um, in learning more about dialogue in a particular context, I'll connect them. If I don't have a prepared story to tell, I'll connect them with people that are involved in that context. And I'll say, will you talk to so and so and learn more about how dialogue helped them? And then I leave it to the participants to tell their story about how dialogue has affected their community. And it's a very, very powerful strategy because people people will trust the stories of actual participants more than they will trust me, who they know this is my job. I'm making money off of dialogue. So there's an automatic, drawback. So the more that we can make stories available of what people are doing in the world with this technology, I think the more people will be attracted to it, and the more we can demonstrate, not just by story, but also by research, what is actually affected when people participate in dialogue. What can we actually demonstrate changes when people participate in a dialogic conversation in the midst of a deep dividing conflict? And we have journals that are doing some of that work. Essential Partners and here in the States has been doing that work for a number of years. We don't have as much data as we would like, um, but I think that that's a promising approach that we're adding to, a little bit more every day. So stories and data, I think, are really important. And I often kid that I haven't written a book yet. I probably never will. But if I do write a book, the kidding that I do is that the title of the book will be The Power of No, um, because I've gotten
Can,
more business by saying
can you
no.
repeat again the power of?
The power of no, as
Okay,
in
okay.
N-O. Um, I've gotten more business by saying, I'm not sure this is right for you. I'm not sure the dialogue is the right approach. Go off and do some thinking. Go off and do your own research. Um, and then if you're still interested, come back. And I think I don't do that as a strategy to get business. I do it sincerely because I want people to really think about whether this is the right approach for them and to do their own thinking and work without sort of feeling like they've been prompted by a professional. Uh, so there's something in that. I'm not sure how that translates to any big policy or anything like that. Um, but yeah, I don't know what more to say about that.
So, you see, when we are talking of dialogues and its different dimensions, for people, conflicting parties to come to a dialogue table, one of the important aspect is, an attitude of non-violence. If I'm violent to each other, if the parties are violent to each other, it can never be an dialogue per se. So, in that context, may I ask you, like, how important do you think is this understanding, a deep understanding of the art and science of non-violence is in the process of dialogues, especially at the community level when there are conflicts in the community. So the community level, how critical it is.
I think it's really at the core because it's the violence of words that leads to so many violent actions. And when people hold a negative image of the other and they express that uh, through words that do damage, it just creates and perpetuates descending cycles of conflict and dehumanization. So, being able to hold a more humanized image of the other and then to be able to express that in words that are not going to portray the other in a dehumanized way or not going to trigger the other in a defensive way, is really at the core of what we're doing. If we can't do that, if we can't create the setting where people can behave in a nonviolent way, obviously not with physical violence, but also to avoid the violence of words, then we're not doing our job. And in order to do that job well, I think the preparatory process, I'm going to go back to that, is really important because I don't know what you experience as a violent language. And I won't know that until I ask you. So we want to really learn from people and help them learn from each other in advance. Here is the language that's going to get in the way of me being able to listen and relate to you. Here's the language that's really hurtful to me that I want to make sure we avoid in this next conversation that we're going to have in dialogue. So raising that up, raising that goal up as having a nonviolent exchange in the verbal sense of the word, in advance is really important to help people then start to imagine themselves into a situation of having a conversation that embodies those nonviolent principles and avoids the kind of violent language that they fear, both in terms of what they might say and what they might hear.
In fact, this has been as a student of communication, you see, I'm attuned to looking at most of the things from the eyes or the prism of communication. And I sincerely believe that without effective and strategic communication, our dialogue can never be successful. So, in that context, in fact, my own work on the whole idea of promoting non-violent communication, I have always felt that for any good, successful dialogues, like when we are teaching, especially school students on dialogue circles in schools and so on and so forth, we talk about the use of strategies of non-violent communication in the process of dialogue. How do you think we can promote this whole idea of non-violent communication, and how important do you think it is in the process of dialogues? So, because you see, non-violent communication entails non-violence in our speech and action. It entails avoidance of stereotypes, judgmental communication. It entails empathy and compassion and gratitude. So these are some of the broad elements of non-violent communication. So how do you think, and how we use as people who are professionals who are into the process of dialogue, sir?
One of the things that I do, I'm not a practicing therapist anymore, but I'm very familiar with different modes of engaging in therapy, particularly family therapy. And there's a stream of family therapy called internal family systems. And it has to do with relating to sort of the parts inside of us that were created in response to different life crises and things like that. And some of the concepts there I find very helpful for people in thinking about how to prepare themselves for dialogue. And one of the concepts is the concept of having a burden, a legacy burden that's been handed down handed down to you from your family. And it could be a way of relating, for instance, or a way of avoiding, or whatever. In the dialogue context, I'm actually working with a group right now, a family foundation. We're preparing for a retreat in the fall. And as I'm interviewing each member of that family foundation, I'm asking them, what are the communication legacies that have been handed down in your family that you want to make sure to embody and grow so that they flourish? And what are the communication legacies that are burdens, that have been destructive, that have gotten in your way, that you want to make sure to prevent and extinguish if they occur in your retreat in the fall? And that starts to help people think about the patterns that they may have been enmeshed in that have been destructive for them. and to start envisioning another way of being. And I think that's really important when thinking about this aspect of violence and nonviolence, to enable people to think about how does that show up in their world, and where might that come from, and what choices do I want to make about whether I want to keep that burden or set it aside and take up something else. I hope that's an answer to your question.
Uh, Fine, sir, fine. Before I go to the next question, may I ask my colleagues here, Mansi and Sthiti and Roji, if they have some points to ask on the
Sir,
conversation?
yes,
Yes,
sir, I
please.
do have a question. Sir, it's for Sir Robert. Sir, you
Yes.
have given a nice speech on how to promote dialogue and all.
Uh-huh.
And so my question is very simple. So, so here is, many a times conflicting ideas have been the reason of many violent acts. So, sir, my question is that how one can develop and express in a peaceful way in expression our own ideas, even if that ideas do not align with the opponent's ideas. So how can we develop and express our develop this peaceful dialogue among ourselves to avoid conflicting situation, to avoid violent acts.
Well, the way that we do that in the dialogue work that I do is I will ask people in advance to think about what makes it impossible for them to listen to the ideas of somebody that they disagree with. What language, what delivery, etc., would make it impossible for you to hear what somebody else has to say that you disagree with. And then I will ask people also to think about for themselves, when you've tried to put forward an idea that's been controversial, or that you know that the person on the other side disagrees with you, what are you aware of doing or refraining from doing that makes it hard for that person to hear your idea, regardless of whether they agree or disagree? And then out of that conversation, we develop agreements or ground rules that are going to structure in certain kinds of listening and speaking, and structure out certain kinds of listening and speaking, and also structure in certain kinds of language and structure out other kinds of language, so that we make it possible within a given group for people to have an agreement about, we can have this conversation about these difficult issues if we have this set of ground rules and agreements around around how we're going to speak about those issues. And I think it's really, really important to do that, because if you don't do that, it's just kind of, you're taking a shot in the dark, not knowing how that other person is going to receive you. If you do that, you have a really good chance of being able to put even the most controversial subjects out there, as long as people are willing to be present and to listen to each other and have them be heard.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so
Any
much.
other question?
You're welcome.
Roji, any questions?
Yes,
Any?
sir, that was the main question I was kind of thinking to ask. So that's it, sir. Because in this present era, that this conflicting ideas have made people version and turn into violent acts. This is the main cause. So I was kept thinking to that things all the time. So answer Robert has put up very nicely that we have to be very structured in answering. We have to listen, and we have to put away in a very structured way, so that everybody in the conversation have a peaceful conversation. And that, thank you very much, sir.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Sthiti and Mansi, before I go to the next question, if you have something, the one we have discussed so far, do you have any points to share with sir, or ask some question? Mansi, I think.
Can I ask you a quick question first?
Yes,
Is
please, definitely.
is it possible just to take a 2-minute break?
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. Definitely. Definitely,
Thank
sir.
you. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'll be right back.
Yeah, Sthiti and Mansi, Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. I have a question, sir, related to the
Yeah,
last
yeah,
one
yeah.
only.
That's right. And Sthiti? Hello, Sthiti.
Yes, sir, I can hear you.
Hello.
Hello, am I
Ah,
audible?
can you? Very, very feeble.
Yes, sir.
So I hope you have something because it's very interesting points which Professor Bob is talking about.
He's
So I'm sure you will have something.
no, actually, the way he was saying and the points he was putting around, I was just 2 minutes back, I was listening something and I could relate to it, but I don't know whether I should tell this here or not. I was
Sorry.
just listening. Hello, am I audible?
Yes, now you're audible.
Yeah, actually, just few hours back, I was listening something, and I don't know whether the statements which Robert sir has made, whether this has
Mhm.
anything to do with it. Means the way he's saying how you structure your thoughts and how you present yourself, it makes an impact on how you communicate with the person and persuade him to do something. So when he was saying this thing, I was just recalling something which I was listening just hours back. But I don't know whether I should
Mhm.
tell this here or not. I don't know about it.
Yes, yes. Why not? Why not? Why not? So we
It's a
start
very
with
it's a very general thing. That's why I was saying.
yes, 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 definitely. So we first start with Mansi. So, sir, if we can start now, sir.
Sure.
Okay. So may I request Mansi to put her question first?
Thank you, Veda, sir. Good morning, Robert, sir.
Good
So
morning.
my
Good
question,
afternoon. Good evening, I guess.
yes, sir, yes, sir. It is good evening here in India. My question is related to the last question which you have answered. So the question is that when the parties are coming together for a dialogue, you are a professional, sir, but the people who are going to engage in the dialogue are not professionals. So what is your role as a dialogue facilitator to ensure that the people who are coming together for a dialogue can structure their thoughts, their their conflicts, their issues which they have in mind, the differences, so as to be able to convey them in a way which is non-violent, sir. Because the role of the dialogue facilitator seems to be more significant here, because the parties, these people can be anybody, not professionals in the field of dialogue. They might not be knowing how to converse with each other, sir. So then how do you ensure that they are able to structure their thoughts in a manner which is harmonious, which brings the conflict or transformations, which transforms the conflict?
Sure. So how do I help them have the structure that's going to help hold the conversation that will be dialogic, if I'm hearing you correctly? Um,
Yes.
and so in this approach to dialogue, I don't do sort of drop-in dialogues where we just sort of advertise we're going to have a dialogue on X and then whoever shows up shows up. Some people do that. I don't. Um, I want to know all the parties that are interested in participating. And I want to work with a small group, a planning group, that will help me to understand the people that might participate in this dialogue. And I'll give you an example of it. I'll go back to this, the group that I'm working with right now, this family foundation, totally divided, unable to speak about issues that are really important to them, and it's impeding their work. So out of that large group of 20 people, I have 4 people that I'm working with that represent different points of view as a planning group. And that planning group has helped me design an interview protocol that I will use to interview all members of the family. And tomorrow, those 4 people are going to have their own sample dialogue that they're going to participate in to talk about a controversial issue that I will facilitate using the structure and process of reflective structured dialogue. So those people will have that experience. And they're also working with me to create the protocol for interviewing, and then they'll work with me to actually design this 2-day get together that we'll have in the fall. So all the way along, I'm involving people in the co-creation of the process that they're going to participate in. Now, I'm giving guidance and I'm giving them a model to work with that's very structured, very bounded. But within that, they have the freedom to move and to create and work with me so that it becomes a joint project by the time that people actually come into the room, that everybody in some way has had some touch with. So that goes a long way toward helping people function in a dialogic context. Also, the preliminary interview that I'm doing when I'm talking with people in advance of a dialogue is starting to model to them the kinds of questions that will come up in dialogue that we'll ask, the kinds of things that they'll be asked to think about and speak about, and the ways that they can expect to be treated by me as a facilitator. So once people come into the room, they've already had the connection with me. They've already gotten a taste of what the flavor is of this conversation. They've been involved in constructing it in some way. So they're very prepared for a different kind of engagement. And honestly, I rarely have problems come up in the context of a dialogue once people finally get into the room. That example I gave you before about people on the policy around treating mental illness with seclusion and restraint, people that could not be in the same room together, came together for a single session, 4-hour dialogue that was so transformative. They came back together, they worked together, they managed to change the policies on the use of seclusion and restraint in our state of Massachusetts here in the States that reduced its use by 85% over the 2 years that they were keeping records. And they went on to create a regional conference because they were so excited about what they were able to do because they were able to participate in that dialogic conversation. But they couldn't do it without all the preparatory work that we did with them to help them get to that point. I hope I'm answering your question. I feel like I'm kind of out there. If you have more that you want to focus me in on, I'd be happy to continue.
No, sir, thank you. That has answered my question. Sir, but then the another question is, we have been saying that the people who facilitate dialogues or the mediators also are people who have that kind of mindset, the mediation mindset. But I think for what I have understood after listening to you, is that there is a lot of skill set, there's a lot of hard work involved, not just in terms of having a mindset, but also there has to be some active, we have to actively participate in the process of ensuring that the dialogue is smooth. So then, is there any specific skill set, the specific learning or professional learning which you had to undergo in order to be a good dialogue facilitator? Or do you believe that there are some intrinsic qualities which enabled you to just do it on your own?
Well, I think it's sort of a both and. So I'm going to be a little flippant, but because people often ask me, what's the best preparation? Or what do you look for when you look for a dialogue, somebody who's going to be a dialogue facilitator? What do you look for? Do you look for a degree or a certification? And I basically say, all that stuff can be really helpful and it can really not make a difference at all if the person doesn't have the right heart. I'll just tell you a quick story. When I was starting my career in mental health, I worked in an inpatient psychiatric unit. I had just a BA, a bachelor's degree, and yet I was doing evaluations of people in the emergency room. I had a lot of responsibility as a very junior clinician. And I went to the psychiatrist who was in charge of this unit one day, and I said, Howard, why am I doing this stuff that's so, like doctors do this stuff that I'm doing? And he said, I can train you to do anything that a psychiatric resident does. It's not about the skill. What I look for is, can you love people? Do you care about people? If you do, then I can teach you. If you don't, then you don't belong in this profession. And I think there's a similar I don't know that I would go quite as far as to say love, but I would go as far as to say, do you have a heart that can really care for people, regardless of whether you agree or disagree with them? Can you bring that heart into your facilitation so that people feel cared for by you? Not in a smothering way, not in a parental way, but just that you're relating to them as a human being who cares. That's the core ingredient for being a dialogue facilitator. If you can't do that, you shouldn't be in the business. And then that's the foundation, right? And then the rest is, how do you shape that care so that it serves the people that you're working with? How do you bring it, hold it, shape it, and also keep it out of the way, keep it on the side? I often use the analogy of the facilitator is mostly a fence sitter. We sit on the fence of the boundaries around the process that's been created by the structure and the agreements that sort of runs itself until a problem arises. And then we become a fence mender, where we have to reweave or repair something that may have been broken. And then we can go back to being on the outside, being more on the circle. And this is where I think dialogue, at least in my experience of being a mediator, dialogue differs from the kind of mediation that I was taught and that I still practice, where I'm the center, I'm the director of, moving people to talk to each other and things like that. I'm more the center of the wheel, the hub of the wheel. And in dialogue facilitation, I talk about the de-centered facilitator. We've created a center of heart by the ways that we've connected with people, but then in the session, we actually get out of the way and allow people to connect with each other and only engage and intervene when a ground rule is violated or where somebody's going off course or whatever. So the core qualities, I think, are the key. And I also think that there are obvious skills of being able to draw people out, to be able to create artful questions that can serve as stimuli for people having conversations, which is it takes a very long time, I think, to learn how to do that well. There's also the skill of design, of thinking about, well, how am I going to design this process? Let's say this process I'm working on now, where there's a retreat in the fall. What are all the steps that I need to go through to think about the sequence of activities that we're going to have in planning? And then what sequence do we want to have people go through in the room? So I need design expertise in thinking about that. And then the ability to engage people and manage when a problem does come up. Let's say somebody does express strong emotion in a way that's traumatizing to other people. I really need to know how to engage in that situation so that I don't check out, become sort of a non-person and go blank, or get over involved and try to take care of somebody to the detriment of them and the group. So I'm rambling on here again, so I'm going to ask for focus me in.
So that was beautifully answered, so profound. So one more question in this context, sir. So since there is a requirement to acquire certain skill sets, what role do you think has neural linguistics, the understanding of neural linguistics has to play in the process of a dialogue, and how important it is to understand this behavioral science for the dialogue facilitator? Also, sir, in the context of online dialogue facilitations, which we are undergoing these days because of the COVID
Yes.
pandemic, sir, how
Yeah.
challenging it has been to decipher the behavior of the parties, because even if we talk about right now, I can only see your face is visible to us. So the
Yes.
entire body language, to understand the entire body language is very challenging, sir. So
Yes.
how have you been able to deal with all these challenges, sir?
Well, I want to distinguish between when you say neurolinguistics, do you mean the formal sort of neurolinguistic programming discipline, or do you mean more generally an understanding of like
Just a
interpersonal
general understanding of what the behavior means, so what certain
Okay.
signs and gestures.
Yeah. So I think it's really very, very helpful. I think, for me and for us who used to be at the Public Conversations Project, an understanding of family dynamics and family systems and communication systems is very important. And then later on, we came to get a lot of training in interpersonal neurobiology, which has been more and more of an interest of mine, particularly the work of Daniel Siegel, and thinking about how people manage conflict and trauma, I think can be really, really helpful for facilitators to function at a high level in very difficult situations. So I don't think you can learn too much about that stuff. If I were to recommend anything for anybody to dive into, there are two resources that I would recommend. Both are Daniel Siegel, and one is the Pocket Handbook of Interpersonal Neurobiology, or Pocket Guides, sorry, and the other is Mindsight. Both of those, well, there's also the psychoneurology of the neurology of relationships, which is really great. Anything by him can inform this work. And there was another part to your question, which I'm forgetting already.
Online.
Oh, online. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, well, so it's interesting, you know, we've gained something and we've lost something, right? So if I'm sitting in a room with a group of people, it's much more difficult for me to discern what's going on in their face, right? I can see their body and I can see the movement. I can see the dance in the room. I can see how bodies are moving in relation to each other and leaning in, leaning out, etc., that I cannot see online. So that is a huge deficit. But I can see facial movements. I can see eyebrows raised. I can see smiles. I can see frowns. I can see people moving and tilting their heads in ways that I can't see when I'm with a group of people. So you know, I've tried to make the best of the situation that we're in and focus in on the individuals where I've lost a lot of the group context to see what the dance of the group is. I'm very eager to get back to being in person with people, but I have to tell you, I have been totally surprised at how effective online dialogues have been. I was opposed to it. I was invited to facilitate, and I said, it's not going to work. But I did facilitate a series of dialogues around COVID experiences that people have had around the world, back when it was at its height, and all around the world. I was floored at how effective it was, and since then have done many more dialogues on COVID and other things, and I've been deeply impressed. And I have a thought about, and this is a completely untested thought, but it's similar to when people ask me, when I do pre-dialogue interviews, do I do them in person, or do I do them on the phone or on Zoom? And I say, I used to do them in person, and then a few times I had to do them on the telephone, and I found that people were more forthcoming and more comfortable talking with me on the phone than they were face to face. So now I do all my preparatory interviews usually on the telephone. And there might be something similar going on, where people feel more willing to share in some ways when they're not face to face with another person. There's that remove. So there's a bit of an advantage, I think, that this format gives us, along with the disadvantages. But I do think that there's a bit of an advantage that I've seen in people, particularly being willing to express strong emotion when I've done COVID dialogues with healthcare workers, for instance. And they may be reluctant to talk about the trauma of death that they've experienced in their hospital or in their nursing home when they're with people in person, that they're willing to share and weep about in an online format. Long answer to a short question.
There is an okay, Mansi, please continue. I had one question related to this, which sir was talking about.
Yes, sir, please. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Robert.
No, yeah, like I think it was a related question, so you can ask after me, because here when we are talking of both the online and the offline form of dialogues, and as someone who has you have been training and advising leaders from different countries, as we see from right from Switzerland to countries. Am I audible? Am I audible?
You are now, but we lost you. Last word was countries.
Okay. So in the context of in the context of doing dialogues, and also you have been advising leaders on prevention and engaging of dialogue from different countries like Taiwan, Germany, Finland, France. In this context, when we are doing both the offline one and also the online one, how important is the understanding of culture? What I say, cultural literacy, is in the context of handling or furthering or encouraging a dialogue between two parties, like how important it is, because many times we find that if we are not in attuned to culture of say XYZ place or community, then that could actually be an it could lead to a dysfunctional communication system or a breakdown in communication. So how important you think, based on your enormous experience of working in different countries?
Yeah, I mean, it's really important. What I think, so again, I'm very partial to story, so I'll just tell you a quick one. Just coming from my own experience, my last name is Staines, which is English. There's an English side to my family, but my mother's name was Miglioranzi, and it's the Italiano side of my family. Now, the ways that my English family engages difficulty and conflict and controversial issues is about 180 degrees different from the ways that my Italian family deals with them. So when my English family would go to my Italian family for dinner, and my Italian family would be very loud and argumentative and passionate, well, the English side of my family felt like they were being rude, they were being dismissive, etc. It was a cultural divide right there at the dinner table. So from a young age, I learned the importance of people understanding where other people were coming from culturally. And I think the mistake that I've made when I started, particularly when I started doing this work, was to think if I learned enough, if I did enough sort of book learning about this culture and that culture, that would somehow set me up well for working in different places. And it really has not worked that way for me. In fact, I went to one country and I had all this sort of book stuff about who they were, and I started talking about it when I got there. And my host just shook her head and said, "Oh," she said, don't go on the basis of that, and don't try to turn yourself into a pretzel to be like we are. Be yourself. Talk to us about who we are. So in this approach to dialogue, we always work at the ground level. So when I'm working, let's say if I'm working in the inner city of Pittsburgh and I'm working with a particular community of color or ethnic community or whatever, I'm going to want to know for them what's consonant for the ways that they manage difficulty and conflict. What kind of language, what kind of patterns are useful or not useful to them. And then if I'm bringing a group, say, from the white suburbs in, I'm going to want to ask them too, and then have a conversation together about how this tradition or culture, subculture, and this tradition or subculture, what needs to happen in order for them to communicate in a constructive way. And I follow that same thing when I work in other countries. I come in, let's say if I'm going to, I was just doing a training in Shanghai in December. And one of the first questions I want to know is, tell me what you think I should know about how you talk about conflict and how you engage conflict in constructive and destructive ways, so that I know what I can bring in that's going to be useful, and I know what I want to keep out that's just going to be Western colonization of thought. So I'm learning as I'm going with each successive group that I'm working with, and trying not to make judgments about whole classes or groups or countries of people, but rather sort of keeping it on a local level. But I do think it's really important to always be asking that question wherever you're working with a group. Even if you think that it's a homogeneous group of folks that you're working with, there may be differences by heritage of the people that are coming into the room.
Thank you, sir. Mansi, please, your question, and then Sthiti. Mansi, please.
So there's this one thing, apart from you are into this dialogue facilitation as a professional, sir. So, but then it is not just the profession which gives us satisfaction, sir. It is not just the monetary reward which motivates us to do something better. So, what is another thing that deep inside which gives you that kind of feeling that yes, this is what I want to do, and what is that feeling which for which you are into this profession of dialogue facilitation? So what is the motivation, what keeps you uh, going in this profession? Because money alone cannot be a motivation. There is a need of self actualization, of finding happiness in what you are doing. So what is your what is that key that keeps you in this profession? So what keeps you happy doing this?
I'll tell you another story. I was working with two men who were on a planning group to talk about homosexuality in the Episcopal Church, the Christian denomination in the United States, at a time when people who were LGBTQ could not serve as priests in this denomination. There was going to be a secret dialogue about this issue, and two men who represented the opposite poles of whether homosexual people should be allowed to be ordained or not had a very contentious exchange in our planning group, and very heated and very passionate. And at the end of, and it was but also structured very dialogically. At the end of a session, I remember we were sitting in a basement of a church, and a summer's day, and I didn't know where this was going to go. With the tenor of the conversation, I thought this could just be the end of this whole project. But one man turned to another and said, "I hate how you think, but I love you." And he wasn't fooling around. He was telling the truth. And you could see this other man's heart. You could see it in his face, how his face started to change because his heart was touched. And I thought, my mentor, my boss, the founder of Public Conversations Project, and I were there, and we walked out the door, and we're both identify as Christians, and we said, there was the presence of the Holy Spirit. There was more at work in that room than just the men, and what an honor to be present to the movement of that Spirit. What an honor to be present to the shift that those men embodied. I mean, you can't buy that. There's no amount of money that I could earn that would give me the satisfaction of being present to people undergoing that kind of transformation where they could hold to their perspectives, but open their hearts to each other. I use the metaphor which comes from the Hebrew Bible. Forgive me, I'm going to get spiritual here, but it's meaningful to me. In the Hebrew Bible, the prophet Ezekiel is told by God, "I will take from you your heart of stone, and I will give you a heart of flesh." And it's that transformation that I see over and over and over and over again in dialogue, where people come to a conflict with a heart of stone toward the other person, and they leave with a fleshy heart of connection to that person, or to that side. That is what I want to spend my life dedicating myself to seeing happen in the world. If we can do that, if we can create the conditions where people can shift from stony to fleshy hearts, as a colleague of mine in Paris says, what greater reward is there, to be able to be part of that, to be able to be part of the tikkun olam, the healing of the world. So yeah, thanks for the question, because that is what's meaningful. It's surely not the money. We wouldn't be in this business if we were motivated by money. But seeing that transformation, seeing people's hearts change and open to each other, wow, there is nothing like it on this earth.
Thank you for your wonderful insight, sir. Sthiti, would you be asking? You just said that you wanted to share something. Sthiti?
Yes, sir. Good evening, sir. And indeed, it was really very pleasant to listen to you, sir, and the incidents you have shared. And I think you don't need to forgive for being spiritual, because I think spirituality gives us the insight as in how to mediate, or as to be how to be non-violent in our communication. I think that's very beautiful of your statement. And somewhere you said that what matters is the loving heart. That was a very beautiful thing, and I found it something very much important when you are talking about mediation and when you try to resolve some conflict. And you also talked about family foundation. Just I was talking to Vedavya sir, as in you took the break for 2 minutes. As I don't know whether this is the right platform to share that story or not, but as in I think you are a lover of stories and you were sharing some part of it. So I felt, yeah, I can share it too. And just a few hours back, I was listening to some spiritual discussion, and indeed it's very beautiful one. As you said that there I think you must be knowing about the concept of guru, or somebody whom you believe in. Okay, that's in India. So a lady, she has certain problem with her husband, her familial issues, and her husband is not quite respectful towards her, and she is not happy with the kind of behavior her husband is throwing towards her. So she goes to her guru, and her husband also believes in that guru. And her husband is a person who is spiritual in his outer world and in the outer behavior he has with other persons, but inside his home he is not that kind of a peaceful man, as in to say. So the lady, what she does, she goes to the guru and tells him, uh, so that she tells her guru that my husband is not quite respectful towards me, so I'm not quite happy with the kind of behavior I'm getting from him, but he's very good to others. Can you please resolve this issue? So her guru says, okay, right now he is not here at the station. When he comes, you just make me remember it. And when her husband comes back from his tour, and he was in some spiritual tour only, her husband, he had gone somewhere to talk about some good things and these and that. So when her husband came back, she tried to just make her guru remember that, yeah, he has come, so please help me. So what he said few words only, and that words clicked me while he talked about loving heart. The husband came to his guru, and she was also sitting there. The guru said that, listen to me, boy. When you are talking to your oblates, that's what we call yajman, where you go and talk about spirituality. The person, suppose I'm talking to you about some spiritual thing, I will consider you as a yajman or oblate. Okay. So Guruji is saying that when you are talking to your oblate and their family, the way you are respectful towards the ladies of that oblate's family, that is the same way you should be respectful towards your own lady in your house. She is the person towards whom you must be respectful, and if you respect her, then only you can talk about respect towards other ladies. And that was the only statement he made, and the person, the husband, really changed after that, and their family issue really got resolved, and it was a beautiful, happy, peaceful family. So I found it to be very much important after listening to you, and I felt I can share it with you.
Yeah,
Was
so thank you so much. That's a really wonderful story, and that's really great advice. Um, and you also put me in mind of something else, which by illustrating the contrast between the behavior in the home and the behavior outside the home. And that's, we don't have time to really get into this, but the power of context, that people behave differently in different contexts. So when we're creating dialogue, we're creating a context for people to come into where certain behaviors are more likely to happen than other behaviors. And all the attention we give in the preparatory is related to that. But the teaching that you've given us about helping people to see the ways that their closest relationships, the ways they manage their closest relationships, will affect or should affect the ways that they hold their outer relationships is really key. And I'm just, thank you so much for the story. I'm going to hold that. In fact, I'm going to take some notes after we're done so I don't forget it, because I want to make sure that I'm able to pass it along.
Thank you, sir. My final question for you, of course, in case Mansi or Roji or Stiti may come up with something else. My final question to you, you see, as a practitioner or someone who has been promoting this whole idea of dialogue and actually initiating and helping and facilitating the process of dialogue, what in your view could be the, the framework of construction of a dialogue for creative coexistence in communities? Like what, in your view, could be that framework of a dialogue process, or of a dialogue for creative coexistence in communities? I'm talking about dialogues in the communities. If you could share your framework, your idea, the mantra of it, we can say.
So when you say communities, do you mean like geographical communities or communities of people in organizations, or all of the above?
Communities could be at different level, of course, at the organizational level, but also at a societal level. Communities, two different communities coming in different way. Of course, when we are talking of facilitation of dialogue, it will have different connotation of in different communities in different countries across the world, like something different in say a country like Malawi to different in some country like Yemen to India. But overall, that whole framework, the overarching framework, if you can share your own views on that, what would that be?
Well, that's a big question. Not sure that I can. Well, I'll give it a shot and we'll see if it's useful or not. But what's coming to mind is the planning process, and I've created a way to teach about this and talk about it that uses alliteration, and I call it the 6 Ps. And it's evocative of both the content and the process of planning that I go through when I'm working with a given community, and that I help them to go through. And it goes like this. So the first is purpose. So to make sure that everybody is clear about what the purpose of getting together would be, and that they share in that purpose, that everybody's on board, that the purpose of this dialogue is X. And where this becomes really important is you often have a lot of people that say that they want dialogue, but when it really comes down to it, they're not on board for the purpose of dialogue and mutual understanding. They're on board for something else. They want to do teaching or conversion or something like that. So the first step is to make sure that there's a shared purpose and a clear purpose for this gathering of dialogue. Knowing that that's your purpose, then the next P is people. Who are the kinds of people, and sometimes the specific people, that need to be involved or that should be involved in order to bring this purpose to fruition? So who do you want to have in the room in order to accomplish that purpose? And then the next P is prevent. What's happened in the past around this issue or in this community? What kinds of communication dynamics or language has happened in the past that you want to prevent happening in your dialogue? And close to that is, what do you want to promote? So what are the exceptions to the sort of the problem story? When has this community engaged in constructive ways? What evidence do you have that they can engage in constructive ways? How do you want to lift that up and promote what's already been done that's positive? And then what other kinds of behaviors do you want to promote when people come together to have a more constructive conversations? So people, purpose, people, prevent, promote. The next P is plan. What's the plan that you want to create, working with a planning group that is going to realize the purpose with the people by preventing some things and promoting others. So then you have your plan. And after all that's done, the last P is preparation. And by that, I don't mean preparing the plan, because we've already done that. I mean helping people prepare themselves for a different kind of engagement. And that's when I was talking earlier about doing the interviewing, working with a planning group, etc. All of that is around helping people develop a different kind of mindset of how they're going to enter this new kind of conversation. So purpose, people, prevent, promote, plan, prepare. I think that framework, no matter where I go, I use that to help people think about what they should be doing and the sequence that they should be doing it in to get to the place of having an actual dialogue. That's what I've got.
Thank you for a very, very insightful and very, very in-depth, ideas about this whole process that you shared with us. It is a really good learning for all of us. As we come towards the end of this whole wonderful conversation that we had with Professor Staines, in case Mansi or Sthiti or Roji has one final question for Sir, they're most welcome to ask before we come to the conclusion of this dialogue. Any final question from any three of you, please? Anyone? Or we come towards the end of this session?
I'll
No
say
question?
thank you so much. Thank you very, very much for all of you, for
Thank
your questions and your engagement, and obviously the passion that you have for the work that you're doing. And thank you for the work that you're doing to
So
heal.
it has been a great honor for having you with us and trying to learn from you. And I'm sure this conversation will further help in in all our participants of what we give for training program in our mediation and community mediation program. When we showcase this dialogue, they will further learn from this and get greater insight. So it has been a wonderful thing. Yes, please.
Absolutely, sir. We have learned quite a lot of things from Sir Robert Staines and all those great ideas that he has put forward. How to have structured conversations to put our ideas perfectly so that our opponents and in the group people are not feel discomfort or having any kind of issues on it. And Sir has vividly described all those things in a very profound way. Thank you, sir, for all those and for enlightening us with precious advices and precious times that you have given to us. Thank you, sir, for that.
You're welcome.